What's up folks, Mike here, When in Watches. Welcome to the video, and this is the first video officially in the series of At the Bench, where I showcase various different watches that I work on from beginning to end, showing how and what I do with each watch, so that you can follow along and get an idea of how things can be done in terms of specific watch repair. So I'm going to try and pick some popular models. I say this is the official start of the series. There are actually two videos already on my channel which feature a Rolex Explorer GMT, or Rolex Explorer 2 should I say. So if you want to go and check those out, by all means go ahead. There's two separate videos. They're quite long, but they've been broken down from I think about 8 hours down to about 45 minutes for the two videos combined, I think, approximately. But those first two videos I did as an experiment to test camera angles, editing, and give me some better ideas of how I can do the series. Because recording video whilst repairing watches isn't necessarily the easiest thing to do, because the camera often gets in the way. But doing those two videos has given me a good idea of how I want to progress. But this is officially what was intended for the first video in this series. So the watch we're going to be going through today is going to be this lovely little beauty, a Seiko Pogue 6139-6002. But before we get into that, I just want to explain how I'm looking to do this series to make it fun for everyone out there. Is in the first two videos, they were quite long, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to break down each watch, depending on which watch it is, into smaller bite-sized pieces, so they're more watchable, and that you can come back and watch the next one in the series without having to sit there for 30-40 minutes watching one really long video. I'm going to try and break them down into smaller, shorter videos if possible. Also, where possible, I'm going to try and shoot in 4K so you can see as much detail as possible, but that will vary depending on the equipment and the memory and how much memory that ends up taking. So we're going to experiment with this particular series of videos on this particular watch in 4K and see how we go. So that's the rundown of what's planned. Hopefully as we progress through this series, things will get better and better and more enjoyable for you guys and girls out there. So without further ado, let's take a look at the watch we're going to be working on. And this, as I say, is a Seiko Pogue, and this is sent in to me by a good friend of mine, Sean, over at Exmoor Blades. If you like or enjoy knife making, then you should go and check his channel out. I'll leave a link in the description to his channel. Go and check him out. Subscribe to him. That'd be great. It'd be much appreciated. He'd really like that. Lovely guy. But this is one of his watches that he sent in for service, because it runs, but it needs some TLC. Not going to do any cosmetic work to it. We're just going to break this down and service the movement, put it all back together, and we're going to put it on a genuine Seiko Pogue strap, the H-Link strap, and hopefully it'll all be tickety-boo. So in this first video, we're just going to break down the casing. I'm going to show you how the casing is broken down and how we get access to the movement. And then the next section after that will be the hands and dial, then the movement, etc., cleaning, and then the reassembly, and then the final assembly. So that'll be the series for this particular watch. So we'll catch up in the next clip where we break down the watch and the casing. Okay folks, so now we're going to remove the movement from the watch itself, which is a relatively straightforward job in most instances. We need either a case back tool, either a case back press, or one of the hand tools. Most of the time the case backs on these watches aren't on super tight, so a hand based tool will work pretty much fine for the most part. So this one's relatively loose already. And I like to put all the case parts in these little white plastic trays, and then I take them down to be ultrasonically cleaned. Usually it takes a couple of cycles to remove all of the dirt. Now inside the watch, if we can get a better view, just here there's a small hole where you can depress the setting lever bolt. And when you do that, the stem will be removable. You don't need to pull out the stem to the setting position to remove the stem. You just need to depress this little bolt in here whilst pulling out the crown. So there we go. We can see in this particular case, this is an original stem and crown. It has the small gear attached to it, which is what rotates the internal bezel. Quite often these are missing, and they're very hard to find nowadays. In fact, I used to have a good supply of these, but now they're all dwindled down to nothing. But we can put this crown to one side for now. And the next stage will be to remove the movement ring, which sits just to the side. And when removing the movement ring, if you just gently press on the pushers, that'll help it come out. We can see a little bit of rust present here on the movement ring, but that's going to go through the cleaner. It's one of the pushers there. One of the other pushers and springs. I like to put the pushers and springs in their own little basket. So somewhere in here there's the other spring. We keep them together when it goes into the ultrasonic. So now we can put a finger on the back of the movement, slide it onto the cushion, then we can just gently and carefully lift off the case, and now we have the watch on its own. We can reinsert the stem back into the movement, give it a slight turn, then we're going to set the hands to 12 o'clock, ready for hand removal. There we go. So I'm just going to get my movement holder. So this is a custom movement holder I made specifically for this model because I do probably about 40 or 50 of these every year. So we're going to get to the hand removal stage next in the video. But before that, we're going to break down the rest of the casing. Now, to remove the bezel is actually relatively simple. Usually around here at the top, around the 11 o'clock position, there should be a small notch that allows you to lift the bezel off the main case. Now I actually like to use a hobby knife because it's nice and thin, slides underneath the bezel and is less likely to mark the rest of the case. But you can use any of these other types of case knife, but just be aware because they're slightly fatter blades, they have a tendency to lift the bezel off from a slightly different position. They're still usable, but it's much easier with something like this, a hobby knife. So what we're going to do is we're going to get that underneath that little notch, and we're going to gently wiggle that into position, and then carefully lift it up, and the bezel comes off nice and easy, just like that. Now the glass isn't glued in or anything like that, it is just supported in a rubber seal, which we can see just around here. You can just push the glass out from the opposite side. It doesn't want to come out because it's held in by years of gunk. So there we go, that's the original glass, pretty scratched up, so we're probably going to replace that with a brand new glass. And then the breakdown here is we remove the rubber gasket, try and carefully not to damage it. But I do actually stock new gaskets anyway, so not going to be much of a problem. And then the breakdown is also, next would be this silver ring, this bezel spring, which allows this inner chapter ring to rotate as it has the plastic gear teeth on the underside. So those are those parts there. Not all of these parts are going in the ultrasonic cleaner, and this is the main case. So as we can see, we've got years of dust build up. There's a fair amount of rust just in there. And once this has been through the cleaner, I'm going to treat all of that rust and clean it up. So now that the case is broken down, we're going to put the parts that we don't want ultrasonic cleaned inside this tray. And that's the old gasket, which is going to be replaced, so we can throw that away. But all the other parts can be cleaned. So we have the main case, the case back, the inner movement retainer, pushers, the bezel, and the original glass, because I'll probably end up sending that back with the watch to make sure that the customer has a choice to keep the original glass if they want to. So the next stage we're going to move on to is to remove the hands on the Seiko Pogue. So back in a sec, so you can get a closer view of that. Okay, so now we're going to move on to removing the hands from the watch. Now, there's a certain way that you can disassemble the hands, relatively straightforward again. What I like to do is I like to take off the sub hand first, then followed by the center chronograph hand, and then the hour and minute hands. I would highly advise not trying to remove all three of the hands at the same time, because you'll likely end up either damaging the chronograph hand or the pinion that the chronograph hand sits on. So I would highly advise taking off the chronograph hand before any of the other hands, but I like to remove the subdial hand because it sits right here at the bottom. So we're going to use a silicone sheet to remove the sub hand. I like these large pocket watch style levers to get underneath the hand. That came off with a little pop. I also like to use a small little plastic pot to keep the hand and dials, hands and dial in. That way it keeps them nice and safe whilst I work on the rest of the watch. And if they need cleaning at any point, I can do that before they're attached at the end. So we're going to use a little piece of dial protector here. You can use a piece of paper, cut out a little slot in it with a pair of scissors. You don't need to buy a dial protector. It's not an absolute must, but we're going to put this here on the dial underneath the hour hand. And that just reduces the risk of any damage to the dial face itself. And again, placing the silicone sheet over the top, just need to get the loop on so I can see this a bit closer. And for this particular purpose, I like to use a Presto tool. This is a version Presto tool used for removing center seconds hands. And I like to use the very center of the tool. Not sure if it's really going to come up there. It has a little hole in the middle there. And I like to get this right underneath the center of the hand itself, which is just about here. And make sure I've got a good grip underneath the hand so that the hand comes off in one go. The only delicate part here is using the right amount of pressure. So if you're going to do this yourself at home, if you're repairing one of these for yourself, then just take your time and don't go in too strong. Just allow gentle, gradual pressure to raise the hand. So I can't even see it. So I'll get it in position and then I'll move it into the camera. So we're in position and we're just going to gently lift, and there we go, the hands come off there. So remove the silicone sheet. And the hand's still stuck there. Not quite ready to come off. There we go. Just needs a little bit of extra persuasion. When moving hands, I've used these normal tweezers, but if you can get a pair of tweezers and you polish the tips both internally and externally, that reduces the risk of scratching the plating on the hands. So now what we're going to do is we're going to move this dial protector back a little bit so we can get the hand tool underneath there. Didn't mean to knock them off there. We'll put the hour and minute hand in the little box to keep them safe. And the last step for this particular video will be to remove the dial itself. And the dial is actually secured by two screws. So there's one over here at the 5:30 position, and there's one up here at the 11 o'clock position. So we're just going to loosen the screws. You don't need to remove the screws completely, just loosen them off ever so slightly. You can do this on the flat or on the side. Just make sure that you're holding the watch nice and secure, and the movement nice and secure. So now with both the screws loose, the dial should just gently lift off like so. So you have the dial, and then you have the dial spacer there. And once you have the dial and the spacer removed, you can pop those in the box, keep them safe, and you can put that in the movement tray. And what I like to do is I like to screw down the dial screws, not super tight, just tighten them back down again, so that when it goes through the cleaner, they don't come loose and start floating around, and then you have to try and find where the dial screws are. So we're just going to tighten those dial screws down. So the next video, which will be video number 2 in the series, we're going to break down the movement. We're going to disassemble it, and I'm going to show you how I disassemble it and which order it's disassembled in, and I'm going to narrate over that, of course, at the time. But that's it for the first video. But be sure to come back for the rest of the series, and hopefully we'll get this watch service back up and running, and back to our friend Sean over at Exmoor Blades. Again, please go and check out his channel. He does some really great stuff over there, and I'm sure he'd appreciate you guys going and checking him out. But until then, I'll see you in the next one.